Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 96 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of the screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece to select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. And as a reminder, before we proceed, I simply want to remind members to be careful when handling their earpieces, especially on your microphone or your neighbor's microphone, or when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. Earpieces placed too close to the microphone are one of the most common causes of sound feedback, which is extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. Today we welcome the Office of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, as well as the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, for a briefing on the Commissioner's Report number 9 entitled Monitoring Marine Fisheries Catch. I would like to welcome our witnesses. From the Office of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, we have Jerry DeMarco, Commissioner, David Norman, Principal, Francis Michaud, Director. Representing the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, we have Brent Napier, Acting Director General, Conservation and Protection. On Zoom, we have Todd Williams, Senior Director, Fisheries Resource Management Operations, and Jennifer Mooney is here, Director, National Licensing Operations. Thank you all for taking the time to appear today. Each department will have 5 minutes or less for an opening statement, and I'll invite Mr. Jerry DeMarco to begin, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to appear before your committee to discuss our report on monitoring marine fisheries catch, which was tabled in the House of Commons on November 7th, 2023. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Joining me today are David Normand and Francis Michaud, who were responsible for the audit. In Canada, approximately 72,000 people make their living directly from fishing and related activities. In 2021, the country's commercial marine fisheries were valued at $4.6 billion. As of 2022, there were 156 federally managed commercial marine fish stocks on Canada's east and west coasts and in the Arctic. Fisheries and Oceans Canada is responsible for monitoring fish catch to ensure that these stocks are sustainably managed. Fish catch information supports many stock management processes, including assessing fish stock health and setting seasonal fishing quotas to ensure that stocks are not depleted. Our audit focused on whether Fisheries and Oceans Canada obtained dependable and timely fisheries catch monitoring information and whether the department used that information to sustainably manage the harvesting of commercial marine fisheries. Overall, we found that the department was unable to collect dependable and timely data to have a full picture of the health of Canada's fish stocks. We also found that the department did not ensure that catch data collected by third-party observers was dependable and timely. De plus, nous avons constaté.
We also found that many of the weaknesses found when we last audited this area 7 years ago remain problematic. For example, the department created the fishery monitoring policy in response to a recommendation in our 2016 audit, but it had not implemented the policy nor supported it with resources or an action plan. 7 years ago, we had also flagged that the department's information management systems needed to be modernized to support the collection of dependable and timely data. We found that progress in this area has been very slow. Fisheries and Oceans Canada has spent about $31 million to implement a system that would provide ready access to data and integrate information across all its regions. However, the department's rollout of this new system is incomplete, and the timeline for delivery has been delayed by 10 years. Without dependable and timely data on fish being caught, Fisheries and Oceans Canada does not know whether commercial stocks are being overfished. The collapse of the Atlantic cod population in the 1990s, with its far-reaching economic and social impacts, has shown that it is far more expensive and difficult to recover depleted stocks than it is to keep them healthy in the first place. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement, and we would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was well within the 5 minutes. I now invite Mr. Brett Napier to give his opening statements.
Thank you, Chair. I believe Todd Williams will be providing the introductory statement today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was the notes I had. So.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good day, members of the committee. I would like to begin by recognizing that I am speaking to you from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory was covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but it, in fact, recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey, Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. My name is Todd Williams. I'm the Acting Director General of Fisheries Resource Management, substantively Senior Director, Fish Management Operations at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And with me today is Brent Napier, Acting Director General, Conservation and Protection, and Jennifer Mooney, Director, National Licensing Operations. I appreciate the opportunity to be here before this committee on behalf of the department to speak to the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development's audit on monitoring of fisheries catch, which was tabled in Parliament on November 7th, 2023. The Commissioner has provided parliamentarians and Canadians with independent analyses and recommendations in their audit on monitoring of fisheries catch. The Commissioner's report raises awareness of the challenges the government and its partners face and with regards to fisheries monitoring. On behalf of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, I would like to thank the Commissioner for his work and acknowledge the report's findings. Moreover, the Department welcomes the recommendations put forth in the report and is taking action to address them. While we agree there are areas for improvement, we are not in agreement with the broad conclusion that monitoring programs in commercial fisheries were not sufficient to meet our fishery objectives. All of our commercial fisheries have catch monitoring programs, and harvest decisions are based on a robust combination of data from those programs, along with data from scientific surveys of stocks. With regard to catch monitoring, the department is in the process of implementing its fishery monitoring policy and recognizes the need to accelerate this work. This is why the federal government has invested $30.9 million from this fiscal year to 2028, with $5.1 million ongoing to support the implementation of this policy. This funding will help accelerate work to achieve the overarching policy goal, that is, to ensure that fishery monitoring programs produce reliable, timely, and accessible fish catch information. In addition, Fisheries and Oceans Canada will continue to make improvements to the At-Sea Observer program, working collaboratively with At-Sea Observer companies. The expansion of electronic logbooks and the development of the Canadian Fisheries Information System, CFIS, are major efforts to improve and enhance catch reporting services, which the department believes are crucial to ensuring modernization and data collection is at the forefront of the fishing industry. Fisheries and Oceans Canada is committed to continuing to improve our catch monitoring programs and to introducing more efficient and effective methods to collect and verify catch data. As part of this commitment, DFO is making strides to modernize catch information systems, modernize the Observer program, and implement the National Fisheries Monitoring Policy. En terminant, Pêche et Océan Canada
In closing, Fisheries and Oceans Canada is committed to sustainably managing Canada's fisheries for the long-term benefit of all Canadians. We recognise the essential role that robust catch data has in achieving that goal, and we are confident that our investments to strengthen catch monitoring over the coming years will have long-term benefits for Canada's fisheries.
Today, we would welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you both, both well within the 5 minutes allotted. Thank you very much. We'll now go to our first round of questions. We'll begin with Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming out today. I'll start off with Mr. DeMarco. You referenced the need for dependable and timely data and that it's not forthcoming. What's changed since your last report? Has anything improved?
Thank you for the question. I've been commissioner now for a little over 3 years within the Office of the Auditor General, and it troubles me that had I been commissioner 7 years ago when our office last looked at this, I would be saying some of the same things then as I'm saying now. So there's been a lack of progress, considering that we audited this issue back in 2016, and we're now just over 7 years later. There have been some improvements. There have been some investments in information technology. The most significant improvement was the creation of the policy that was promised after our audit. But as we set out in our report, the implementation of the policy is still lacking, as well as the resources to implement it. So it is disappointing that many of the findings that we made 7 years ago still hold true today.
Thank you. Now, you've mentioned that stocks may be overfished as a result of missing catch data. Is it possible that the opposite could be true, that we're missing economic opportunity as a result of incomplete stock assessments?
Yeah, a lack of data the situation could be both, yes. It could be that the data are not there and quotas are set too low. The data are not there, quotas are set too high. It could be either. Yeah.
Thank you. So this takes me into Northern Cod, which is mentioned quite a bit in your report. And, you know, DFO has nearly doubled its budget and it's had a 40% increase in personnel since 2015. And from an order paper question, I was told that logbook data results since 2019 have not been compiled for the species Northern Cod. So there's a lot of data that's been available without, you know, new technology or whatever. It's basically old technology and very, very old data that couldn't be provided to me. So in another, so did DFO not have enough money, or did they not have enough personnel, or did the minister simply not make it a priority, Mr. Napier?
Sorry, thank you for the question, Chair. I think it was a priority and it remains a priority. From an enforcement perspective, we have ensured that we have a commitment, both to ensure that officers are out doing the work. They're using the most highly technical tools available to them.
But Mr. Napier, yes. That's data that would be number crunched in an office where you've hired, 800-900 people here in Ottawa in very high level positions, and at the same time there was no trawl data to be analyzed. So I have to question the efficiency of the science program. If you have data that's 4 years old, no trawl data coming in to be analyzed, why did I get an answer back in an order paper question that the data is not compiled after 4 years?
I can, again, speak only on the enforcement front, but I know, as my colleague Todd Williams mentioned, that aside from some of the catch monitoring tools that were assessed, such as the third-party monitoring, there's a significant amount of other information that's collected particularly by the enforcement group, whether it be through intelligence, through aircraft surveillance, through on-water patrols, through our own port inspections, and through facilities inspections as well.
So, how important is this catch data? I'd like to ask Mr. Williams, how important is catch rate data, especially with the absence of a trawl survey, in getting a picture of the biomass?
And thanks very much, Mr. Chair, for that question. There are a number of data sources that we use when making fisheries management decisions. Certainly science data is one. If we are missing a trawl, there are ways that we can look back at the existing science that we had previously and extrapolate from that, and again, make some conclusions as to where we can go forward. Certainly, the lack of catch data is an issue, and that's certainly something that can be included when it comes to fisheries management decisions.
But Mr. Williams, I'm sorry, but that data was provided, and it's the law for fishermen to submit that data. You've been sitting on that data for a very, very long time, and in the Northern Cod, we've seen exponentially increasing catch rates. When I went to the minister in June, there was no data to support it other than the Sentinel fishery, which showed no improvement for some reason. It's strange for me to find out in my order paper question that the Sentinel fishery showed no improvement in the stock when gillnet's catch rates were up about 50 times what they were in the 80s on a per hour basis, based on what I'm seeing on the ground. So, do you trust the data that's provided by fishermen, or do you discount that?
I think all of that is actually very important, and that's part of the purpose of the fishery monitoring policy, is to essentially conduct an audit on the risk and the quality and dependability of that data which is coming in. In some cases, in some fisheries, the quality of that data is excellent, and we know it for certain and it can be validated. In other cases where there's different requirements, then it is a bit more of a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Small. That's your time. Mr. Hardy is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A difficult question, I think, for Mr. Williams. In the course of our various studies, one of the things that we've also discovered over and above what the Commissioner's report says is that the DFO's efforts in stock assessments is quite behind schedule in many cases, in many places, and with many species. And if on top of that, we don't have, good enough data on the catch, I mean, in lieu of stock assessments, one would assume that you go to the precautionary principle and you manage fishing effort. But managing fishing effort effectively means knowing what's being caught. And the Commissioner's report suggests that we really don't have a good grasp of that. So really, are we in any place to know exactly what the state of our current industry is, or our indigenous fishery is, much less where we're going in the future? It seems that everything is in a black box right now. Can you comment on that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that question. I think it's important to note that certainly not all fisheries are equal. We have many fisheries that have 100% at sea observer coverage. We have very good data coming out of those fisheries, as well as very recent stock assessments. And then in other cases, the stock assessments, perhaps we might have missed one. In other cases, perhaps we don't have 100% at sea observer. Perhaps we have some other method to get that catch information, perhaps hail in, hail out, dockside monitoring, and or different percentages of at sea observer coverage. So I think there are, and that's all based on us as a department working with harvesters to determine what is feasible. 100% at sea observer coverage is not feasible across all of our fisheries, especially small boat operators. And so we have to figure out which tools work in which fisheries. And so that's why I think you see, in some cases, some gaps. But I guess it's important to note that while there are some gaps, and we recognize that, and we're working to improve that, we do have instances and very good examples of where we have good, reliable data coming into the department to further augment the information coming from science.
Well, it would be good to get some examples from you, perhaps in writing, which would kind of fulfill a need that we have here for more clarity on this, because certainly the Commissioner's report suggests that there's very limited success. And it does lead to, I guess, another thing that's been bothering a number of us, and many of us have been on this committee since late 2015. We've done lots of reports with lots of recommendations. But, when it's time to go back and find out what's been done, and I'll certainly point to, for instance, the risks and benefits study that came out in 2019, precious little has been even started, much less accomplished. And I guess I have to wonder, given this information and given the gaps that we've seen mentioned time and time again, the priority setting has to be questioned. But as well, the use of the resources. The government has put a lot more resources into the DFO since 2015, and this is disappointing to see, a lack of progress on really critical facets of managing this resource that we have. Again, who sets the priorities? Are you convinced they're the right ones? Are you reviewing them, Mr. Williams?
Thank you very much for the question. I think the issue of catch monitoring and the data that we collect is very important. In fact, today I'm from Halifax for this meeting because I was chairing the Atlantic Mackerel Advisory Committee meeting, where we had a session on fishery monitoring policy implementation and how that can feed into the rebuilding plan of that stock, which is in the critical zone. So we take this very seriously, and we're incorporating the recommendations that were provided to us by the Commissioner, and working that into our business lines and right across our fisheries where we think improvements can be made. And today's a good example of that.
I'll probably have further questions. I'll pass on. We'll move on.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now move to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos témoins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for witnesses for being here. Thank you for making yourselves available. We very much appreciate that. I've got lots of questions. I don't know which one to start with. So I'll get right down to the heart of the matter, because we're seeing this in media reports. It seems that several little shrimp SMEs have been basically pushed to close down. The quota is far too small, and it's being shared with 100-foot vessels and above. But we know that the fishery economy is really based in the SMEs and villages. That's certainly the case in Quebec. It's a whole village that's penalised when a vessel is not able to go out to sea. So if we're claiming that we don't have the correct data, and it seems that most evidence should be coming from scientists and harvesters who are saying that there's 300 million tons of redfish in the Gulf, and there needs a minimum of 300,000 of tons per year in order to be able to manage the redfish that's eating up all the shrimp. So why are we just being offered 25,000 tons in terms of quota, and this is being shared by fleets that have got big vessels, and we're leaving at the dockside lots of vessels. And we're told afterwards that we don't have the correct data, we don't have all of the data, and we're already having this negative impact on our economies. It's hard to understand the decisions that are being taken by the DFO, and I'm not the only one. There are lots of harvesters who are really in distress and also very frustrated at the moment. And when we hear that the data is incomplete, it makes it even worse. It's even more painful for them. So can we find a halfway house? Can we increase the quotas to give an opportunity to these people to be able to earn their living without having an impact on stock? Because there's redfish everywhere. That has been proven. Mr. Williams, perhaps, please.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. I think a couple of points. One, the situation within Gulf shrimp and the estuary is problematic, and the minister certainly recognizes that. The department recognizes that, and the total allowable catch would be lower this season as a result of where that stock is. In terms of redfish, that is a stock which is coming out of moratorium. The minister has made the decision that it will reopen this year, and we're working diligently to do that. With respect to large vessels operating in the Gulf, there is no policy with respect to preventing vessels over 100 feet from operating in the Gulf. When we speak of monitoring, in some cases, I'm not saying this is a universal truth, but in some cases, monitoring larger vessels can be easier in the sense of with at-sea observers and collecting that data.
J'arrête, Monsieur Williams.
I would like to stop you there because you've taken quite a bit of time to tell us what we already know. But I'd like to interject because I need to know something. Of course, we can't stop big vessels from fishing, but you're saying that 30 years ago, it was the big vessels that actually endangered this type of fishery. So that's the real concern for our people. And I'd like to repeat it to us. These are people who know the environment better than all of us around the table. And they are reading the situation day after day. And I think they're the ones that are most motivated to not deplete and lose this resource. So why are we not listening to them? And how could we listen to them even more?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In fact, we are working with them. The announcement was just made by the minister just a week and a half ago with respect to the redfish fishery. She announced a minimum total allowable catch of 25,000 tons, which can be increased based on feedback which we get and advice we get from industry. In fact, just Friday, I communicated with industry to review the minister's decision, as well as the most recent science. There will be an advisory committee meeting in the coming weeks where we will work collaboratively with industry to develop the fishery management plan, including monitoring requirements for this fishery going forward.
Merci. J'espère que ça va être annoncé rapidement parce que
Thank you. I hope this announcement will come soon because we need predictability in the fishery sector. You can't just launch a vessel. There's all of the labour, and we're already lagging behind. We're very late. I'd also like to know why it's only the Quebec fishers when it comes to pelagic species. It's only Quebec harvesters that have to declare their catches, report their catches. If it was extended to everyone, would that not be a way to actually collect more data? These vessels are docked because there are certain closures, but could we not actually make it obligatory to have these catch declarations made?
Thank you very much. Certainly within the license conditions, we have requirements with respect to reporting of catches. I take your point, though. There is certainly inconsistency between fleets, between regions, and that's actually one of the things that implementing the fishery monitoring policy will help us discover. It will tease out those inconsistencies and help us find solutions to improve that data.
Thank you, Madam Debienne. We'll move now to Ms. Baer for 6 minutes.
Thank you, our new chair. So the first question that I have, I think I'm going to direct it to you, Mr. DeMarco, is that how I pronounce it? One thing that I found myself reflecting on when I was reading this report, as many people in this around this table know, I'm originally from Newfoundland, And my family were not fishers. However, we were deeply impacted by the cod collapse. So much so that my family, because of the shift in economy, packed everything up, packed in our car and drove from one coast to the other to start new lives because of the direct impacts of the cod collapse, even though we weren't fishers. And so I bring that with me in my work in this role, and is one of the many reasons why I so appreciate the opportunity to sit around this table. And I noticed that you use that as an example in your report as one of the rationales as to why this is particularly important that we're paying attention. I'm wondering if you can sort of bring it back for us and highlight on those reflections and why it is essential that we are collecting data and have the appropriate leadership and actions that follow based on the data that's collected.
Thank you for the question. Yes, if we don't learn from the past, we may be at risk of being doomed to repeat it. We don't see a likelihood of a repeat of the incredible negative impacts of the collapse of the cod, because there's no single fishery of that size and importance anymore in Canada. But there are, if you look at all of the fisheries together, they're still extremely important, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. So we can learn from that unfortunate story that you came to a head back in 1992. It's quite striking that here, 2024, we still don't have a recovery, and that's why I concluded my opening remarks by talking about the fact that it's much better to maintain healthy stocks than to allow them to deplete and then hope to recover them, because it may take decades, if at all possible. So we can learn from those mistakes in the past. It is troubling that if we just go back 7 years to the last time our Office of the Auditor General looked at this issue, some of the same problems continue. And we just heard from Mr. Williams about inconsistencies. That was something we pointed out in previous work in this area. We talked about and from our last audit, we also had the introduction of the fisheries monitoring policy promised in 2017. It came in in 2019. But as you see from Exhibit 9.2, no fish, not even one species of the 156, has gone through the 6 steps of the policy. So we would like to see an acceleration of the efforts to learn from the mistakes of the past and to implement not only our recommendations from this past November, but also our recommendations from 2016.
Thank you. Your report provides us some graphs and some information of the breakdown of data and information that was collected. And I noticed that there's a repeat category that says that the evidence could not be provided. Can you speak a little bit more around what you saw and the examples of when and how information was not provided, so I could better understand that?
Yeah, so I'll introduce our answer to that, and then I'll turn it over to Monsieur Normand for more detail. So part of our role as auditors within the Office of the Auditor General of Canada is to check on these assertions made by departments. And so we had assertions about both timeliness and coverage regarding at-sea and dockside monitoring. And what was troubling is that for some of the sampling that we did, when the department asserted that it did have the data that was needed, when we sampled that, we found many instances where it wasn't. And I'll ask Mr. Normand to use one of the examples from the exhibits to help explain that.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So basically, the approach that we took is that in the first place, we asked the department if they had any systematic way now of tracking whether the coverage and timeliness requirements of providing the data were met. And we found that actually there was no such thing as a systematic way of doing this. So what we did is that we dug further by having the department open their books and search their records for us to find the answer to the question. And not though for the 156 fish stocks. There are 130 that are subject to observer company data and collecting catch data from the fishing industry. So, and when we ask this question, and this is a bit of the explanation why those graphics that you see in our report are a bit complicated, because we found many problems. To a large extent, we found that the monitoring programs were not fully implemented. Either they were not implemented, either the department could not tell because the records couldn't allow them to tell. And then in a number of cases, the answer was that, yes, we have the information, and here's the answer, the coverage is met. In those cases where the coverage was met and timeliness, then we could not audit everything because it's too large a population, so we took a sample. And almost consistently, while looking at that sample, I guess the purpose of the sample was to generalize to the whole population and report a simple graphics in our report. However, that was not possible because almost consistently the audit found that either we found more cases of non-compliance, more cases of the department not being able to provide the data. So at the end of the day, what we found in our report, the data that are presented, is what we found of the negative cases, I would say. But there could be more than that, but we could not get to the bottom of it. Yeah.
Thank you. That's well beyond the 6 minutes. We'll now move to 5-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Perkins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. Commissioner, I'd like to start with you, and I'd like to take a sort of step back, especially for those who are watching and trying to figure out what the heck it is we're talking about here. The goal is to get an integrated fisheries management plan for all major fish species so that DFO can manage in a sustainable way our commercial stocks. Is that correct?
Yes, sustainable management is the ultimate objective.
Ultimate objective. And can you do that if you don't have either the science or the catch data?
So we looked at the catch data in this audit. We may look at the science in another audit to come. And I'd
recommend you look at our report in this committee on that.
Yes, I've been following that. So on the catch data, we found enough deficiencies that we couldn't do a lot in the second line of inquiry of our audit, which is how well is the data used to sustainably manage fisheries. If we had seen good data, then we could make a better assessment of the sustainable management. But because there were gaps in the data, we aren't confident in being able to sign off one way or the other on whether, in fact, the management decisions are sustainable.
So catch data is like polling. It's a picture of what happened in the past. It doesn't actually tell you necessarily what's going to happen in the future. It may tell you that the governing party is in a decline in popularity, but it doesn't predict with accuracy what's going to happen in the next election. So it's sort of like that, right? It's self-reported for the most part, catch data by fishermen from what they caught this year, last year, the year before, correct?
Self-reporting, but there's also third-party observers. There are different sets.
The third-party observers are primarily on the offshore, not in the inshore. And in most cases, my understanding, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, is DFO actually doesn't come down to the wharf and actually inspect inshore fishermen and their reporting of logs. It's a self-reporting thing that then gets collected up by a third party and reported to DFO. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, that's the model they've chosen to operate. They could have kept it in-house and have essentially a fleet of DFO staff doing this sort of thing, but they have sourced it to the outsourced it to the.
They could have had a fleet of DFO people. They're since 2019. Just since 2019, DFO's budget has increased by 25%, and it's doubled from $2 billion to over $4 billion since 2016. But they haven't put any more money in here. I do know that the HR department in DFO has grown from 400 to 833. So there's been over 400 people put into that. And you know how many enforcement people, because enforcement's a key part of all of this too, have been added to DFO in that time? 7. Doesn't seem to me like the emphasis is on the right syllable for DFO if your fundamental mandate is to manage the conservation and sustainable commercial fisheries for our country.
Yes, so to your point, two important aspects of this audit and our previous audit. One, we didn't see enough resources going into the implementation of the monitoring policy that was produced in 2019, and that's set out in Exhibit 9.2. And then with respect to enforcement, our audit from the previous year, so this was 2022, our Protecting Aquatic Species at Risk, we do have a section there on enforcement, and we would agree with you that the resources that are needed in enforcement were not there, and that's set out in Exhibit 7.11 of our Report 7 from 2022, which this committee, we're happy to give a copy of that to the committee as well.
Thank you. And I did an order paper question, as it's called here in the House of Commons, which asked for how many CNP officers existed from those years on. And I was shocked to learn that there's a whole 156 enforcement people for all of Canada in DFO, while there's 833 people in HR. So again, it seems to me if you don't know what the catch data is, if you have inadequate science, which was a unanimous report by this committee, and you don't put money into enforcement, you can't actually ensure that we have the sustainability of our stocks. Without policing, you don't have certainty of data.
I would agree completely. I mean, the science, the catch data, the enforcement, all integral parts of sustainable management of a fishery. And these are all procedural measures, right? So we would also want to look at the results. How has it got, how have things gone? And the cod example is well known to everyone. But also think about the fact that with our Protecting Aquatic Species at Risk report, how many fish species in Canada have become extinct, extirpated, endangered, threatened, or special concern. It's over 200 species, and fisheries is a federal concern. They have the ability to manage harvests, to address fish habitat degradation and pollution of fisheries waters. And yet we see that almost a quarter of all the species at risk in Canada are fish species. So from a results point of view, it is troubling.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco. I'll have to stop you there and move on to our next member, which is Mr. Kellaway, who is online.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Some really great questions today. I'm going to start with the Commissioner. Adequate data on fish stocks is essential to maintaining healthy fish populations. I think everyone in the room would agree with that. And right now, DFO seems to be encouraging e-logs for some fisheries. So do you think bringing new technologies like e-logs into the fishery industry will assist in the data collection for DFO? That's question one. And are there other technologies that would you recommend that DFO implement to ensure more accurate data collection?
Yeah, so you're getting at the issue of modernization of their system, their information management system. So this is the second time around for us recommending improvements in that regard. So we have our 2023 report on that and also our 2016 report where we agree with you that modernizing the system, and not only modernizing it, but integrating it. We recall the answer to the question to Member Desbiens about the inconsistencies in approaches and so on. So it's not just a matter of modernizing it, but it's also integrating the systems to eliminate those inconsistencies and also achieve economies of scale and have a more integrated and consistent approach to sustainable management. In terms of specific areas, I can turn to Monsieur Normand to more directly address that aspect of the question because I didn't get into that level of specificity.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. So in our audit, we looked at the overall system for managing catch data, and we found that there were parts of a system in place in Newfoundland that was available, but that for fish catch information, largely the systems were still at the inception stage. Now, part of this, I think, since 2003, e-logs have been considered to accelerate accelerate the logging of data, etc., but also to ensure the quality, because this being automated would help. However, in our audit, we found that e-logs were still at the very beginning and inception stage as well. In the response to our recommendation, the department indicated that they wish to pursue this avenue.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to work on doing some integration here. So I'm going to stay on the e-log theme. So I want to go to officials for a second, because recently other officials mentioned in a previous committee meeting that not all e-log works perfectly for different fisheries. So I was wondering if you can elaborate on why different types of e-logs are needed now, and how that may pose challenges to the modernization efforts that we're just talking in the first question.
Perhaps I can answer this question. So with respect to e-logs, yes, we have made quite a bit of progress since the Commissioner's report was finalized at the end of December. And we have set out the technical specifications for all fisheries across the country for those applications to be developed. And they are based on the current paper logbook information that is already collected. And so we're continuing to advance that in that regard.
Okay. So it's just staying with officials for a second and moving away from e-logs. DFO is taking many steps to ensure that Canada meets its environmental targets, including through its 30 by 30 initiative, which will convert, as we all know, 30% of Canada's oceans into conservation areas. So I'm wondering, officials, if you could tell us how actions like the 30 by 30 plan helps Canada meet environmental targets while protecting fish stock.
Thank you for the question. I can certainly answer for the enforcement perspective. And I will integrate two answers with the technology. So we've been using quite a bit of satellite technology, our dark vessel detection system, which we've had some really good success with, especially in international fora, and bringing those things back to Canada. And some of these remote areas, the 30 by 30, which you'll be looking at as more vulnerable areas in the north, where they're not traditional fisheries, having to get eyes on those areas, ensuring that they're not being overfished, protecting those valuable areas, ensuring that new stocks that are developing are properly managed, and that information is available to make sound decisions.
How much time do I have, Chair? That's it?
Five
Okay,
seconds. You got it pretty
That's
close.
fine.
So,
thank you,
thank
sir.
you, Mr. Kellaway. We'll move on now to Madame Dubian for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair.
J'ai de la compétition.
Have I got some competition in terms of music today, Chair? Okay, so I'll get back to zero with my own timer. So I'll continue with my line of questioning. Earlier, you said that since 2003, Mr. Normand, you've observed that there has been a certain monitoring system that's still being implemented. It's not yet totally up and running. So you would put it at which percentage in terms of being operational over the last 20 years? Which percentage have we reached? Well, thank you very much. Yes. Back in 1999, we looked at 2 particular fish stocks, and with that audit, we found that there were some integrated systems, and we made the same comment in 2016, where there was a great deal of lack of integration of the system still. And in the meantime, within the framework of our audit, we looked at 2 aspects of the IT system, in particular, namely for quota management, which was set up in 5 regions out of 6. But as I said earlier, when it comes to data collection, the systems that actually manage data, well, the department was in the process of setting this system up in eastern provinces, but there was no part of the system that was fully up and running. So there's nothing that's 100% up and running. Indeed, yes. That is part of these challenges. And as the Commissioner said at the outset, some of the comments that we made back in 2016 still actually apply now, in particular when it comes to these IT systems. And that's the basis for the DFO decisions that have been taken, such as the ones that we're seeing now. Yes, that is indeed the case. With our own investigation to get these data and try and compile them to get a snapshot, it was quite difficult to get responses because the data was spread over several different areas, which brings us back to this question of the lack of integration of the systems.
Thank you, Madam Dubin. Only 10 seconds left, so a little time. Now move on to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I was hoping you were going to say 5. Thank you. Okay, I'll readjust then. So I think the first question I'm going to ask is again to Mr. DeMarco. We're hearing consistently, so if I could just ask my colleagues, it's hard to focus down here on this end, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. DeMarco, I'm wondering, we're hearing from many of those on the water, a discrepancy between the data or lack of data that's being collected and the decisions that are being made and what they're seeing on the water. So that goes on both ends, both those who are saying that there's unfair cuts that are being made, impacting their livelihoods, and then on the other side, people saying that there's a sustainability risk of the species and there's not enough being done. And I'm wondering if you can speak to how that interconnects to what we're talking about today, and if you think that some of that disconnect between the observations on the water and the decisions are being made, if you think that the results that you're telling us today may play a part in that.
Yeah, so we've been talking mainly about the importance of good data and reliable data, dependable and timely data for decisions to sustainably manage a fishery. But as you point out, having that data that's reliable and dependable also makes it, gets better buy-in from the regulated community. They're more confident in the decisions of the department and more likely to be in agreement with the quotas that are set and so on. So it has the good data has an impact on both the substantive decisions and also the buy-in or the support that the communities have for those decisions. So that's another reason why we should have better data, is so that the regulated community feels more confident in the regulator.
Thank you very much. And I think I'll try to put a quick question into, oh my gosh, the name's not in front of me, to Mr. Napke or Williams. I'm just wondering if you could provide an update on what's happening. We're hearing from witnesses around all the steps forward that are happening around this technology, but clearly the evidence is showing us that the technology is not in place that's required. So perhaps you can provide me some quick insights on what's happening and why we're not seeing those actions taken.
Thank you for the question. And yeah, I mean, technology is slow to advance, but we're making great strides. So we're looking at increasing technology in our existing SWAT-C observers, looking at handheld modules that can provide information in a more timely way, can collect it, there are fewer mistakes, you improve your data quality, but also new technologies like electronic monitoring. Now, we have had experience on the West Coast for some time now, learning from that and applying those in the case on the East Coast. Our observer program is stretched. We only have 9 designated companies. We only have 100 observers. You heard about 130 different fisheries requiring at-sea observers. So we're going to have to use those technologies to support that collection of information. We also have officers on the ground. In fact, we have 550 frontline officers that are available, that they themselves collect information. They can catch, monitor, they go board and verify compliance. So if harvesters are collecting as they should, and real time we're aboard and we're confirming that, then the data at the end of it is not necessarily assured, but is in better quality than you would expect otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Napier. That's additional time for you, actually. We'll move on now to the next round for 5 minutes. Mr. Bragdon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the guests and to those bearing witness here today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to just have one question. I'll yield to my friend, Mr. Small, here shortly. But obviously, we've had a couple reports come out, one in 2016 and one in 2020. There was a lot of talk about planning to plan, and they were planning a meeting to plan, and then they were going to plan to have a plan that was going to implement a plan that was going to really resolve in a great plan. And hopefully, at the end of the planning of the plan, we would start to get results that were reported back to the committee about how the plan was going. I'd like to ask all of you, in your estimation, how far along the trajectory of these plans have we come since they started and initiated the original planning to plan? So I'll start with you, Mr. DeMarco.
Well, I'm glad I brought the action plan from our 2016 audit with me.
I appreciate that.
Because I'm growing frustrated a little bit too.
Yeah.
Because if you actually look at the responses to our 2016 report, there's reason for optimism. There's commitments to do something. And if you look at the responses from the department to this year, from the audit from this past fall, strong with timelines and so on. What I'd like to see, though, is implementation on the ground, or in this case, in the ocean and in the lakes, and not just good intentions, but good actions.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco. And Mr. Napier, if you want to speak on behalf of the department, because obviously I think this goes across the board, that so much talk has gone into plans, plans about plans, and plans around plans. Not a lot of action and concrete steps that produce results. And our fish harvesters and those communities that rely on the fisheries are looking for concrete steps and actions that can ensure the safety and the future of their industries. Can you report where we're at as far as action as versus to just plans?
We have developed an action plan. All kidding aside, the department remains committed to delivering on actions. And although some of the, even from 2016 and 2023, might not be evident, there has been work that has been produced. So national verification strategy, one of the pieces that was of concern to the auditor in 2016 was conflict of interest. We've done an interim protocol. So we've moved the bar. We've started to advance on some of these things. Much of this takes a lot of consultation. Much of this, we have a COVID break in there. We're 2 years where for example, the at-sea observer program did not function. And I don't mean to use that as an excuse. I know it had impacts on many, but it is a viable excuse in terms of changing gears, ensuring there's safety in those industries. And what we're doing too is supporting some of those third-party monitors with harassment protection. Recruitment and retention is critical in those industries, and it's been very challenging to bring people in. And so we've had to pivot on some of our initial plans to address some of these concrete issues.
Thank you, Mr. Over to Mr. Small here.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. I guess I'll address this question to Mr. DeMarco here. Mr. DeMarco, if catch data is missing and stock assessments are incomplete, can this impact the eco-certification of fisheries? And if so, what would be the impact?
Eco-certification isn't something that we looked at, but certification does rely on good quality data, just like sustainable management decisions require good quality data. But I'm afraid I can't give you any more detail than that in terms of certifications for sustainable fisheries and so on in the marketplace.
How about someone from the department, maybe, Mr. Napier or?
I can perhaps speak to that, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead with Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much. So yes, as the Commissioner just noted, certainly eco-certification schemes such as the Marine Stewardship Council, MSC, and others, they do rely on science data, catch data, and that's very important as part of their certification process. We also know we work with them very closely and work with industry very closely if there are gaps to try to address those if they are seeking certification or to retain certification.
So we've had some stakeholders, Mr. Williams, that have approached us directly with big concerns, especially with Greenland halibut in the north because of the lack of trawl surveys. But I think if some of these eco-certification groups knew that your catch data is 4 years behind, I don't think they'd be all that well pleased. What do you think? On northern cod, for example.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that. With respect to northern cod, so 2J3KL, that is going to be, science assessment is coming up on that. But we do know, at least based on an assessment last year that it appears that we might be able to have a commercial fishery in that for that stock. We'd be working with industry to develop the monitoring requirements for that. And if there is a certification question for that, we will work with industry again to ensure that they have the information that they need to seek certification.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We'll move on to, I believe it's Mr. Cormier wants a round now for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Beau travail.
Thank you. Good work so far. Nothing to say on that. I have some questions for Mr. DeMarco. Thank you for being with us today. Mr. DeMarco, I'd like to come back to certain concerns expressed by my colleague, Caroline Desbiens. There's been an announcement for opening up of red fish fisheries after 30 years of moratorium, and it happens just outside my window in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence. Now, I recognise the immense work that's been done by Minister Boulité in order to finally open up this fishery again. I've read your report quickly, reading between the lines. It seems that what you've said today about the lack of data, etc., well, what concerns me in all of this is as follows. With the opening up of the red fish fisheries and what we've seen with the unfortunate closure of this fishery 30 years ago, what concerns me is how can we ensure that this fishery activity is sustainable and will be beneficial from communities. We've seen in the new fisheries strategy that it has to be beneficial for our communities. I'm very worried about big fish vessels coming into the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, and I'd like to get your opinion on that, because you speak in your report a great deal about sustainable fishery, which will be beneficial, advantageous for communities. So are we going in the right direction? There's lots of discussions. Decisions aren't going to be taken on this yet. But if we're looking at the red fish activity, and if we want it to last for several years, then should we not actually be ensuring that this will be beneficial for communities rather than big corporations? We have not analysed differences between large vessels and other fishers, but we have the same objective as you. We want to be reassured, satisfied that the systems have been put in place to ensure sustainability of the fisheries. That's the same aim shared by the department, and that is our aim. Fishery sustainability. We don't want to have ups and down cycles of opening and closure of fisheries. Am I reassured that this will actually be managed in a sustainable way? No, is my answer. Because of the reasons I've cited in my report, there's not enough reliable data that the department has at its disposal. And if our recommendations are implemented, things will improve, but I'll never be fully reassured until I can actually see the proof in the pudding or the fish in the sea. But in terms of putting into action our recommendations, that would certainly help with sustainability. So if I come back to red fish versus shrimp, we know that since 2016, redfish is really exploding in the St. Lawrence Gulf, and it's a real predator, shrimp predator. So if in the DFO they know that they've had to do something and should be doing something as of 2016 in terms of the amount of redfish growing in the St. Lawrence. And this year we've seen a drastic reduction in the shrimp quota. Unfortunately, I don't want to be setting off the alarm bells, but it seems there's going to be a really negative impact. So do you think that the department has done what it was meant to do in terms of managing shrimp resources over the last 4 or 5 years, when they knew that the number of red fish was actually exponentially exploding and that it's a predator for shrimp? Is this for me? Yes, for you. Well, we did not do a deep dive into specific species, but to come back to the 2 species that you've just mentioned, it is difficult. There are difficulties when it comes to the state of data today, and it will be even more difficult as a result of climate change and the changing ocean temperatures. So there's lots of challenges ahead for the department to ensure that they can sustainably manage all of this. What are they going to do? Well, that's a question that would need to be put to the department. What are they going to do to ensure sustainable fishing?
Merci.
Thank you very much. I think that my time is up.
For that round of questioning, we're now on to the next round. We start again with, I believe it's Mr. Perkins is going to go now.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Commissioner, maybe I can sort of carry on with where I left off as a concrete example, again, through one of these great, marvelous things we call order paper questions in the House of Commons, where you get to ask questions and sometimes get responses. So one of the response that I got recently was about the science data related to Canada's most lucrative fish stock, the lobster fishery in the Maritimes. It's broken up into various fishing areas, as you may know, called LFAs, lobster fishing areas. And this summer, the DFO granted an increase in quota. The only quota part, place where there's a quota on lobster is on the offshore, which Clearwater Lobster owns all 8 licenses, has a monopoly, in an area 3 times the size of Nova Scotia. I asked, they increased the quota by 7,200 metric tons, so I asked for the science behind that increase in quota, and I asked for the science for all of the LFA areas in the Maritimes, and I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn that the answer was, we don't have any science data on that. We rely solely on catch data. Do you think in setting an integrated fisheries management plan, the only thing DFO should rely on is catch data?
No, there's a role for various sources of data. I'm not familiar with the specific example that you're giving, but as I mentioned before, science data, catch data, enforcement data are all important in terms of inputs into a more informed decision on sustainability.
So in doing the data part, DFO has appeared before this committee on a study that we're engaged in right now on illegal and unreported fishing, and said they sort of guess at what the illegal quota is. And we saw that in my area last year, where they guessed that the Alver fishery had been poached to the tune of 4 to 5 times the quota within 18 days. And so they shut it down and then let the poaching happen through the end of July. And do you think guessing at poaching in our various species, because there is no dockside monitoring in the summer in southwest Nova Scotia on the lobster fishery either, when illegal lobster catches are being brought in, do you think that some sort of guess from DFO based on the current size is an adequate way to put catch data into the fisheries management plan?
A preferable approach would be to implement a recommendation from our report from 2022 on protecting aquatic species at risk, where we said that DFO should ensure that enough staff are available to enforce the prohibitions in both the Species at Risk Act and the Fisheries Act. So rather than guessing, if there's enough resources put into enforcement, then first of all, you have better data about illegal fishing, but also you deter illegal fishing by increasing the enforcement.
So I'm going to ask you about something that's in the paper today, and that you probably can't comment. Mr. Napier might comment on it. But the part of the enforcement part of effectiveness of fisheries management is CNP laying charges and the Public Prosecution Office actually pursuing those charges. And the Public Prosecution Office in Nova Scotia announced today they're not going to pursue any charges that are laid by CNP with regard to illegal elver fishing if it has to do with First Nations. And so is that an appropriate way? I mean, that will lead, in my view, to more lawlessness on the water and encouragement when they announce that there won't be enforcement. The Public Prosecution Office won't pursue that. Do you think that's going to discourage CNP officers from actually laying charges?
Thank you for the question, Chair. And I don't believe so. I think we still have a responsibility, and there is a separation. As you mentioned, PPSC will determine charges or not. It's still our responsibility to collect that information, to collect the evidence in cases of unauthorized fishing and provide that as a case and moving forward. In terms of the results, if they're not what we want, I mean, that's what we're used to, not just in that, but many other fisheries as well. So
I've actually heard from CNP officers on the ground that they find that discouraging, and when they're putting their lives at risk, it actually does affect whether or not they think it's worth laying charges on the ground if they know that the Public Prosecution Office is not going to pursue them.
And certainly, I would imagine they would be discouraged, but I think they're loyal in their implementation. They conduct their work. If it's unauthorized, they document it as they would in any other case. And I think they're hoping for the result that eventually, through other mechanisms within the department, through negotiation, that we resolve this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins and Mr. Napier. Now, the next individual is Mr. Kellaway, please, online. No? Oh, Mr. Hardy, pardon me. Pardon me, I read my list wrong. My apologies, sir.
Totally. I wanted to reflect on my my evil twin on X over here and the comment he made about the the growth in the human resources department at the DFO. I have a theory that the health and effectiveness of any organization is inversely related to the number of people in HR. I'll let you just think on that one. I want to talk about, though, Exhibit 9.2 in your report. There's 5 steps for implementing the fishery monitoring policy. Prioritize the fisheries, access the current fishery program, or assess them, I should say, set conservation and compliance monitoring objectives, identify monitoring requirements, develop and operationalize a fishery monitoring program. So step 5, we actually get to do something. And then 6, review the monitoring program performance. Mr. Williams or Mr. Napier, one of you can answer yes or no. Is this really what the DFO accepts as the proper approach?
Yes, that is an accurate reflection of the fishery monitoring policy.
Okay, so in 8 years, we've managed to identify 22 of 156 fish stocks. Of that, 2 of that 22, or 2 out of 156 possible stocks, have reached the second stage, assessing the current fishery monitoring programs. And I guess there's nothing beyond that, and it's been 8 years, okay? In assessing the current fishery monitoring programs, of the 2 of the 22, are you convinced, based on what the report is telling us about the shortcomings of the monitoring program, are you sure even the 2 of the 22 have been effectively assessed?
I am, yes. They have been using the data that was available to us, including catch data supplied to us from harvesters. We were able to arrive at what we believe, following the policy, accurate numbers with respect to quality and risk.
Okay. How much of that data was extrapolated?
There is some level of qualitative assumptions built into the assessments. But it is the policy as it's developed and as approved by the department. And as I understand it, the commissioner and his office supported the policy in that way in terms of how it was designed.
Okay. With all climate change and all of the things that are taking place out there in the water, even extrapolation becomes a pretty tricky business. How many people are actually working on these 5 steps? Do we have a number of staff that's actually engaged in, following the department's process and performance in these 5 steps? How many people are working there?
So dedicated resources was provided in the 2023 budget. I can tell you on my team, we have 2 full-time equivalents working on this and to provide national coordination and to implement on the stocks which we manage out of Ottawa. In the regions, they also have resources based in fish management, conservation and protection, and in science to implement FMP as well. And they've gone through and assessed their fisheries and are working through it as well. The assessment is just the next step after we've already prioritized, of course.
I'm sorry.
Objectives is with
Mr. Williams. I'm sorry.
External.
Did you just indicate that this activity, these 5 steps, weren't actually resourced until after the 2023 budget?
That is correct. We were using existing resources to implement the policy until 2023.
And those existing resources, did they then follow through and become dedicated, or were they new people coming in 2023?
These are the same resources that we use to manage the fishery, our fishery analysts.
And how were the 22 of the 156 fish stocks prioritized? What made them a priority for this activity?
Sure. So we looked at a few things within the criteria. First, were they listed as Schedule 1 and as under regulation? So were they Batch 1, I should say, where we have those higher regulatory requirements to manage it as per the fish stock provisions? That was 1. 2, if not there, are they coming into what we think would be Batch 2 when those get added to the regulation? We also looked at the economic value of those fisheries. That's why we see lobster listed as a priority area. We also looked at the ecological significance of a stock, so Atlantic mackerel, where it's a forage species. So using those criteria, we applied that in terms of our prioritization.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We'll move on to our next questioner, our member. Madam Ben, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Monsieur Williams.
So this is for Mr. Williams or Mr. Napier? Well, given that the fisheries is an ecosystem, within that ecosystem there are fish and there are also humans. So there's a whole economy of scale that has to be protected, and of course there's sustainability, and then there's a climate change variable. Sustainable fishery, we want to protect our resources and the expertise of the fishers as well. And seeing that all of that already exists, can we envisage in the short term that we could take into account the relationship between the important mass of redfish in the Gulf and, on the other hand, the small quota, and actually increase the quota so that it could be distributed in a fair way in favour of the small vessels in the short term, because we're opening up this activity very soon and people are totally left in the dark. So in this context, when there's humans and children, families who are waiting to see what their fate is going to be, can we actually take the small risk that won't actually wipe out this resource or kill anyone, to actually allow these people to be able to make it this year financially? Is there something that could be envisaged in the short term, or am I just dreaming in Technicolor here?
I can perhaps speak to that. So the minister had a very difficult decision with respect to the allocation of the redfish resource. Her decision did see a 20% percentage point reduction in the offshore, which was reallocated to equally an Indigenous quota bank and affected shrimp harvesters in the Gulf and estuary. The other fleets' shares were protected. So the inshore, midshore they were protected and remain the same. I think in terms of other short-term initiatives that would be beyond the mandate of fisheries management per se.
20 seconds.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez, Monsieur?
What do you think, Commissioner, of that answer? Are we in distress?
Je n'ai aucune opinion.
I do not have any opinion on the details of the decisions about this fisheries activity because we've looked at the system as a whole rather than having a deep dive on particular fish stocks.
Thank you. And we'll move on now to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mr. DeMarco, I was elected in 2021, so I haven't been around since 2015 like some of my colleagues. And I'm curious to know, how long have you been in the position of commissioner? How long have you been doing this work?
My third anniversary was last week.
Okay. I'm trying to understand sort of the history here that brought us to this time that we are. You were referencing 7 years, and I'm wondering, I mean, this must not be new to us that we need to accumulate data to better understand how to ensure our fisheries are sustainable. Were there recommendations similar to this made before? Is this something that's been going on for a while? It just helps my brain to understand what brought us to where we are today.
Yes, so even though you and I may be dating back to 2021 in terms of familiarity with this specific issue, our office, the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, reported on this issue, in the late 90s, as Mr. Normand mentioned, but most recently before this past one, Sustaining Canada's Major Fish Stocks, Report 2 from 2016. So one of the predecessor commissioners in the Office of the Auditor General reported on this, and as I mentioned before, it was disappointing for me to open this file and to see how many similarities there were in both the issues that we were highlighting and also the recommendations that we were making. It is frustrating to have to re-recommend issues when we've done a full audit of the issue only 7 years prior.
Thank you. So what's interesting to me is that clearly, based on the information that we have, we know that there has been consecutive governments that have underfunded this area in order to ensure that we have the data required from different parties. So I just want to highlight that, which is interesting. My question is to Mr. Napier. I'm wondering, were you surprised by the results of this audit?
No, I was not. I mean, being close to the program as well, I understood some of the challenges we've had over the years in terms of instituting it. I recognized the program and the infrastructure challenges around the change of model. So in 2013, the third-party model changed from a co-funded model to an industry-funded model, and we have some growing pains and transition pains from that. As well as some recruitment retention issues. So some of these things, obviously, we welcomed some of the recommendations, and some being the same. We had taken some action. So national verification strategy is something we implemented after 2016, which was intended to do a deep dive into the program, not just to look at the recommendations, but the program as a whole and how we can more effectively administer it.
Thank you, Madam Barron, or Ms. Barron, and Mr. Napier. Moving on now to Mr. Small for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're going to laugh me wore out. Okay, so we've heard some talk about electronic logbooks. I'm just wondering about from the practical side of it, and I don't know, maybe Jennifer, you might be able to talk to this one, or sorry, Ms. Mooney, I'm sorry. I'm sure you're quite familiar with the coastline of Newfoundland and Labrador especially being very remote, and many areas around the island of Newfoundland and Labrador and up the Quebec lower and north shore, where there's very little cell coverage or whatnot. How would that data be transmitted for electronic logbooks? Would it be live, or would you be waiting until the fishermen return to the wharf?
Thank you for the question. So when harvesters are entering the data into their logbooks, that information is submitted live to the department. And in the case where you're entering a remote area and there is a lack of access, that data in the logbook is essentially locked. And when a harvester does enter an area where that access is regained, that information is then sent to the department.
So they wouldn't be relying on VMS or, black boxes, because a lot of the fleet, for example, the lobster fleet and the halibut fleet in Nova Scotia don't use VMS. So how would that look for them?
So specifically with VMS, they don't have, as you mentioned, they don't have that access, but there's satellite provisions as well. So in fisheries where there's a timeliness is essential, there are satellite options, and that's of course what VMS uses. But as Ms. Mooney said, in cases where that transmission is not possible, that information is locked. And so CMP has been involved in that. We're satisfied there's continuity with that data. And as they reach an area where they can transmit, it's then transmitted to the department.
So my next question is, do you think that you'll have the logbook data analyzed back to 2020 before you start getting the new data flowing in from the electronic logbooks? For example, in Northern Cod.
I agree that the lack of data and information, timely catch data and information is a challenge. And we need to have timely data for informing our fisheries management decisions. I'm not responsible for Newfoundland regional licensing in terms of the perhaps some of the gaps there in entering information, but that's why we need to have e-logs going forward.
Thank you. Okay, so lobster is a species where we have little scientific data existing, and catch data is very important because it's basically all we have. In analyzing lobster logbooks, how's the speed in pumping out that data and doing that analysis? Because we know there's been significant drops in Area 30, in most of southwest Nova Scotia and Bay of Fundy this year. And so this could be catching them off guard. Are you analyzing the data fast enough so that you can give a forecast to these harvesters as to what they're facing?
So regarding lobster and crab, yes, that is a priority area for e-logs this year. And all regions have plans to roll out mandatory. And also with respect to how we analyze the information, Quebec region, for example, is already gathering that e-log information for lobsters. So I would presume that is helping them inform their regional decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, in light of what we've heard here today, very concerning information from the Commissioner and the team, I've got a motion to move here, and I've sent it to the clerk, and it's translated, I believe, in both official languages.
Okay, I believe the clerk is circulating it as we speak.
Okay. And so ready to go? So, Mr. Chair, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and considering the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development's 2023 report titled Monitoring Marine Fisheries Catch and the Commissioner's testimony received by the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans here today, Tuesday, February 6th, 2004, the committee requests that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard appear for no fewer than 2 hours as soon as possible to answer questions related to her department's failure to implement the fishery monitoring policy.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Small, I'm just waiting for confirmation that it's been distributed. As I say, I'm just waiting for confirmation that it's been distributed. If we'd like to suspend for just a minute, in case until it's been distributed. Okay.
Is that my glass of water?
reconvene. The motion has been distributed. I believe there's been huddles that took place. Ms. Barron did have her hand up, but I spoke to her, and that was just a question on something else, so she didn't need to speak. I see Mr. Perkins and Mr. Hardy. Go ahead, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I think the motion is self-evident. I think the evidence in this report and the previous one that the commissioner referenced is shocking. And the frustration, here's the 216 report where there was a plan to get a plan for having integrated fisheries management plans. The department said they would have a plan for that plan of how to get there in 2017. A year later after that report, I suspect they haven't done that since we have virtually no more integrated fishery management plans now than we did then. So these reports keep getting done by the Commissioner of Environment. They keep getting done by this committee on other aspects of this. And the department says, yes, we agree. The minister says yes and signs off that we agree. Actually, the 6 ministers have said, yes, we agree. And then nothing happens. Nothing gets done. And the minister clearly hopes, or the successive ministers, that this just goes away and there'll be another report and it'll get one day in committee. They'll never call the minister on it because the minister only comes for estimates. And he or she will never have to answer for it. Well, that time is over. The minister's got to answer for her and her predecessors in not fulfilling their duties either to Parliament or to the fishing community or to Canada's environment by ignoring these reports, setting these false deadlines knowingly, sending these reports in response to Parliament, and then actually not doing anything about it. I think it's time. Enough is enough. That famous movie where they said, I'm not going to take this anymore. Well, we're not going to take it anymore. The minister's got to come and be held accountable for the actions of her department ignoring all these reports.
Having gone through this for about 8 years, I cannot disagree. However, that said, I just have one small amendment to make to the motion, and that is that in the line where it says on Tuesday, February 6, 2024, the committee requests that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and here's the amendment, and appropriate officials appear for no fewer than 2 hours. And if you're happy with that, we're happy with that. Yeah, okay.
Motion to amend. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. Ms. Barron, did you have a comment on the main motion now?
Yes, I was just going to say that I agree with the main motion. Happy for it to move forward. And I was just going to ask, just because we are speaking to the main motion, just for if we can work together as a committee to make sure that when we know there's a motion coming forward to give each other a heads up, because myself and Caroline are the only ones who get chopped off the end when we bring forward motions like this, as far as our opportunity to speak and our time being taken away. So if we were to redistribute our time more fairly at the beginning, I think that would be a more fair process for us to take as committee members. So just a note, if I could share that with my colleagues for us to work together. And of course, I will do the same due diligence moving forward.
I've been cut off on this one too.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
We're
you.
working together.
Ms. Barron, I don't see any further hands. Oh, Ms. Debian, or Madam.
Oui, je suis assez d'accord avec.
Yes, I quite agree with this motion as well. If we transposed this type of management to a vessel, my dad, the fishing captain, would say that we were heading towards a shipwreck. However, I'd like to specify something. Within the DFO, there's a whole history, and it's not just the Liberal government that's to blame.
Thank you, Madam Debian. I don't see any other hands up. All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Are you in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you for that. We will carry on with our questioning now then. I have Mr. Morrissey apparently is up next.
Oh, thank you, Chair. My question is to Mr. DeMarco. Found it very interesting and also troubling, your report. My question is, if you are a fisher on the East Coast, and I'm referencing the East Coast, can you be confident your livelihood is being managed by DFO on accurate and complete data?
No.
No. That's troubling then, given that so many coastal communities depend on a well-managed fishery for the future. What, if you could briefly tell the committee, what has to change to ensure that these fishers can have confidence in the data that's being used for management decisions that affect their livelihood?
So I'll cover that in a brief manner and reference my answer to Member Barron's question earlier about not only do we need good data for the substantive decisions about sustainability of the fisheries, but we need good data so that there's buy-in from the communities and the regulated industry in terms of confidence in the decisions that are being made that affect their livelihoods. So it has two benefits, the better data, better decisions, and better support for those decisions. I would like to see, as a starting point, the prompt implementation of all of the recommendations from this report, plus our previous report from 2016. Would that be enough? No, because this report is about monitoring fish catch. There's the science aspect as well as the enforcement aspect, which are out of scope of this particular audit. So we would need to see improvements in those areas as well, so that the department has what it needs to sustain the fisheries, and then the communities have what they need to be confident in those decisions about sustainability.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back to you, but first a question to Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, what species on the East Coast do you have total confidence in that the department stock data is accurately managing?
Thank you very much for the question. We do have fisheries in where we have 100% at-sea observer coverage, for example, such as northern shrimp, SFAs 4 through 6, just as an example. That in and of itself doesn't guarantee quality data in and of itself. Of course, that has to be verified and double checked, but it is among one example of a fishery where we have fairly good coverage.
Thank you. In the last 2 years, there was a decision to close the spring mackerel fishery, the bait fishery we referred to. And this is my question going back to Mr. DeMarco. Did you have a chance to look at the data process that's used by DFO in the management of the spring mackerel fishery?
No, as I've indicated before, we were looking at the quality of the data, and then we were hoping to look at the use of that data in sustainability decisions.
So you didn't go species specific?
No,
okay.
We didn't go into any species specifically. We didn't even go into the second question that deeply because of the problems we found in the first question.
Okay, but based on what you've told the committee and your data and the time I got left, then if the department applies the same management practices based on the data process that you audited, would you have confidence in the decision that would impact the spring mackerel fishery?
I can't speak to that specific species, but I can point you to our conclusion, which is, given the department had not ensured that the data was dependable and timely, in our opinion, it did not form a solid basis for the department to rely on for decision making. That's a global conclusion. We didn't do a deep dive into specific species.
Thank you for your candidness. I'll concede, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We are almost at 5:30, but because we started at 3:44 PM, the clerk has advised we can go to 5:44 PM, which would permit another 5-minute, 5-minute, 2.5, 2.5, if the committee so chooses. Okay. Then we're over to the Conservative Party for 5 minutes. Mr. Perkins, is it?
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up, Mr. Williams, on the question you were just asked. In the under 65-foot fleet in Area 6, how many observers were on the boats this year? My understanding.
Thank you very much for that.
Go ahead, sorry.
I think what I'll have to do is provide something in writing to answer that question to the member.
So obviously it's not 100%. That was
I
only on the
believe
over 65-foot, the longliners.
That's correct.
Right, so on the under 65 fleet, you don't know. My understanding
There
is
are different requirements.
it's been declining every year the last few years, and it was 0 this year. So if you have 0 observers on the under 65-foot fleet, you can't have confidence in the shrimp numbers. I'd like to go back to the commissioner and ask about a couple of your charts. I'm specifically interested in the charts 9.4 and 9.3. So if I'm well, why don't I start? Can you explain 9.3 first and then 9.4?
I think I'll turn it to Monsieur Normand to do it more succinctly than I could. So, Monsieur Normand?
Yes, thank you for the question. These charts are all built the same way. The chart in Exhibit 9.4 is for looks at coverage for dockside monitoring, and the chart for 9.3 looks at sea observation for coverage. We present in our report similar charts for both at sea and dockside monitoring for both aspects of coverage and timeliness. And I need to apologize that, like I said earlier, these charts are a bit complicated to follow because we had to do more work to get to the answers that we were looking for.
Okay, but if I understand, just because I have limited time,
Yep.
the department made claims about what they had coverage on and data on. And if I'm reading these two charts right, when you went in, they actually didn't have any. They couldn't produce data on any of the fish stock reports that they said they had data on. So I believe that the department provides bonuses. It's one of their metrics. So are they fudging the data?
Actually, what we asked the department in the first place was for the cases where they knew the coverage was and timeliness requirements were either not established in the first place or they knew that they were not met. And they reported to us the places where, based on their records, they believed that the requirements were met. When we heard that, we further investigated based on sampling, and in that context, we actually found more cases of noncompliance and more cases where they could not tell.
So that's a long way of saying they claim to have data on catch data in their numbers that they report up through the system. But when you went in and audited it, they couldn't actually produce it.
Exactly, yes.
So how do we believe any of the reports that we get from the department in any of these metrics they give at the end of the year about their performance and meeting the performance targets when they're self-regulating and they're looks to me like they're fudging the data. So they don't have the data. They have no integrated fisheries management plan. They have virtually no data on the catch data, and what they have is self-reported. They think they have observers in offshore, but they have little in the inshore. Mr. Williams just said they don't know. Well, we know that there's 0 observers in Newfoundland in Area 6 last year. Mr. Williams, I'd like to know about the observer status for snow crab in Newfoundland this year. How many observers did you have in the snow crab fleet this year?
I would have to report back to the committee. Sometimes there is a difference between what is required or what is stated on a license condition versus what the actual availability of an observer or dockside monitor actually is.
You thought that in shrimp, in northern shrimp, you had 100%, but that turns out not to be correct because you didn't have, from what I understand, you had nobody in the under 65-foot fleet, so you don't have 100% coverage on shrimp. And now you don't know how much you had on snow crab, but you knew how much you had on the longliners on shrimp, but you don't know it for snow crab in the reports?
Thank you very much for that. I should have specified it was the offshore northern shrimp fishery where I know we have 100%. As for the snow crab, we would have to report back to you in writing.
Commissioner has pointed out a number of times
that's your time. Okay. A little bit over, actually. Go to now the Liberal members. Mr. Cormier online, apparently.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back to Commissioner DeMarco. Throughout this meeting, you have clearly said, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you have been saying that there's a lack of data, that the department did not have sufficient data to ensure a good assessment of different stocks. Am I correct or not? Yes, not enough data and not reliable enough. Two things. Perfect is the answer. As I often say in the committee, and it's important for me to do that, my dad was a fisher, a lobster fisher, his whole life, and you talked about 72,000 people in Canada who live off fishery, and more than 4.6 billion in terms of economic spin-offs from fishing, and increasingly fishers have a vote of non-confidence, if you like, in the data coming from the DFO. So do you not think that it would be advantageous for the DFO in collaboration with different fisheries associations and with fishers who are out on the sea day after day, and the officials, in fact, have more officials out on the sea to collect data and have a more accurate overview of our different fish stocks, and some of them are in difficulty and perhaps others are not so much in difficulty as we think. So don't you think that we need to have more collaboration, commissioners, between the fishers who are out on the sea day after day and on the other hand our officials who are stuck in their offices day after day and do not necessarily actually see the reality out on the sea? Yes, I agree for the two reasons that I've already mentioned. Namely, we want to have better decisions on sustainable fishing, and then communities would be more in agreement with these decisions if it was more reliable and sustainable. And so that the committee really understands the scope of your message here, I know that my Conservative colleagues want to blame the government for any failures over the last number of years. But all of this has stretched out over time, and I think we need to look towards the future. If you look towards the future, Commissioner, what do you suggest we really need to improve to ensure, first of all, that our fish stocks are correctly dealt with, and that secondly, that our communities can really take advantage of these resources that are so important, and for fisheries to be able to ensure their livelihood, and so that our communities continue to live off fishing. So what should we really do in terms of the DFO in a radical way to remedy this situation with our different fish stocks and the incomplete data that you've already mentioned? Well, to summarize, that is why we've come out with recommendations in our report. So all of these recommendations, if they were to be implemented, that would really help to improve the situation and to have a better sustainability of fish stocks. So I would start with our recommendations, really. And I don't want to be back here again in 6 or 7 years' time coming out with the same recommendations once again. Mr. Cormier. Now, I've read some of your recommendations. I don't recall all of your recommendations, but do you think that extra investments are needed, or do you think that the resources that are currently available in the DFO are sufficient to be able to, well, how should I put it? To be able to ensure that some of your recommendations could actually be achieved right away without extra funds. So without extra funds, do you think we would be able to have some good conclusions vis-à-vis your recommendations? Well, in order to implement our recommendations, they need more resources to do this. Do they need more resources as a total, or can we move resources around within the department? I don't know, because we didn't take a deep dive into the whole department. But yes, we need to have more resources to implement these recommendations, and also recommendations from 2022 on endangered species. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Marco. Moving on now to Madame Desbiens again for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. As it's the last time that I'm going to put questions to our witnesses, I'd like to ask them, both Mr. Napier, Mr. Williams on the one hand, and then Mr. DeMarco or Mr. Normand, as follows. Well, we've observed in Quebec that our fishers have been exemplary in many respects and have provided measures and data and met the data obligations and their measurements at the dockside. And we have many people have come and seen this happening. We've got these obligations as Quebecers. Why can they not be extended and applied to everyone? Perhaps that would then bring in more data quite quickly, because people are out there on the sea, they're fishing. So why is it only Quebecers who've got this obligation to actually give catch reports? And to what extent are we actually taking decisions in the DFO for the Atlantic region? And often we observe in Quebec that Quebecers are strongly penalized as a result of these DFO decisions, because in Quebec the small fishing economy and small vessels is what keep villages alive along the coast. And it's these small vessels that are often being penalized. And larger vessels, wider and longer vessels, well, we fear that they're going to bring about the same effect that we had 30 years ago. These are the two concerns of Quebecers. They're very deeply concerned about this. So how can we change things? How can we improve this in the short term? I'd really like to underline that, because it's in the short term that people are going to be hanging up their key and not being able to use their vessels anymore. So, Mr. DeMarco, Mr. Napier, Mr. Williams, how can we do things differently in the short term?
Thank you for the question, Chair, and merci pour la question. From an enforcement perspective, I can say to you that those license holders in Quebec are not the sole license holders who have to provide catch information. Most other regions do. In fact, in most fisheries, logbooks are a requirement. The department looks at risk, it looks at conservation to determine what measures need to be in each of those fisheries. The fisheries monitoring policy will support that activity and look for a more even distribution, potentially, of those sorts of requirements. But I think at this stage, I wouldn't say there is an inequality in the way that the department requires Quebec fishers to provide information versus potentially other regions. And maybe Todd has something additional.
Thank you, Mr. Napier. We've actually gone over time for Madame Desbiens. Now, Ms. Barron for the final round.
Thank you, Chair. My question is perhaps for Mr. DeMarco, and then if Mr. Napier has time, I know I'm not pronouncing your name right. I'm saying it different every time. Has some follow-up comments, that'd be great. Specifically around the audit found that there was no consultation that took place with Indigenous groups and stakeholders is what I'm reading. And I'm wondering if you can share your findings around that specific section, and perhaps a response from Mr. Napier would be great as well. Napier. I don't know. What is it? Napier. Thank you.
Monsieur Normand will answer that question.
So thank you for the question. So in the course of the implementation of the fisheries management policy, there is a step when identifying which stocks to prioritize where there is a requirement to consult with First Nations. And we found that in that context, the identification of the 22 that are presented in our report, they were not consulted.
Any additional thoughts from you, Mr. Napier?
Mr. Napier, I could
Thank you.
jump in. Okay, you're welcome. Thank you very much for the question. In fact, it's a very good question. And just 2 weeks ago, I was at the Aboriginal Policy Congress in Cape Breton that they're invited to speak at their Indigenous Fisheries Conference. And we spoke about that collaboration with Indigenous partners on the implementation of the Fisheries Monitoring Program. There is also a small G's and C's component that was provided in that funding envelope for Indigenous engagement and collaboration in implementing the policy and improving the data that goes into the system. Thank you.
I guess my only follow-up question is around how this fits with the Guardian, the Indigenous Guardian program that we've been talking about throughout the previous study that we were looking at, as far as the ability to effectively collect data and how we're working alongside Indigenous people who are rightfully so taking on the stewardship of their land and water and ice.
Thank you for the question. I can certainly address that. So the Indigenous or Aboriginal Guardian Program, as it's called, are fishery guardians under the Fisheries Act. So they have all the powers vested in there. I mean, we have the ability to limit those powers or use the full extent of them. We're looking now at renewing that entire program. We're looking at training to ensure that proper training is provided to those communities, and this way they are able to help. The point of a guardian is to complement and support conservation. So we're very excited about this. There's been some delays in the process, but we're striving to get that done relatively soon.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. That concludes our round of questioning today. I want to thank all of the witnesses for appearing and providing the valuable information and responses today. Thank you very much for appearing. And with that, that wraps up our round of questioning. Our next meeting on Thursday will be a business meeting to discuss committee business. I call this meeting adjourned.
Well done.